The power of emotional withdrawal. The moment you need a reaction, you've already given away leverage. Most people never notice this exchange happening. It feels subtle, almost invisible. You say something and wait for a reply. You post something and check for validation. You defend yourself and hope to be understood. Beneath all of it is a silent dependency. The need for emotional confirmation. The need to feel seen, agreed with, respected, acknowledged. And the moment that need takes control, your internal stability becomes negotiable. What most people miss is that emotional expression is not weakness, emotional dependency is. There is a difference. You can feel deeply and still remain sovereign. But when your mood, confidence, or direction shifts based on someone else's response, your center is no longer yours. It has been outsourced. Attachment makes you predictable. Predictability makes you controllable. When someone knows exactly what will trigger you, they hold a quiet map to your nervous system. They know what tone will irritate you, what words will provoke you, what silence will unsettle you. And the more attached you are to outcomes, being liked, right, being understood, the easier you are to maneuver. Detachment, in contrast, disrupts this map. It removes the emotional handles others unconsciously reach for. When there is no visible hook to grab, tension has nowhere to land. When you do not chase clarity, approval, or resolution, you create psychological space, and in that space, something shifts. You begin to observe rather than react. This is where calm danger forms. Emotional withdrawal is not withdrawal from life, it is withdrawal from unnecessary emotional transactions. It is the refusal to exchange inner stability for momentary satisfaction. It is the discipline of noticing the impulse to respond, and deciding whether it deserves action. There is always an impulse. The impulse to correct someone who misunderstood you, the impulse to defend your name, the impulse to retaliate against disrespect, the impulse to prove a point. These impulses feel justified, they feel righteous, they feel necessary, but they are rarely strategic. Reaction satisfies emotion, restraint strengthens authority. When you respond immediately, you relieve tension in the short term. You feel heard, you feel expressed, but you also reveal your emotional entry points. You show where pressure works, you show where insecurity lives. When you pause, something different happens. The energy that would have spilled outward turns inward. You begin to ask a more dangerous question. Why did this trigger me? That question changes everything. Instead of fighting the external stimulus, you study the internal reaction. You examine the attachment behind it. Are you attached to being perceived as competent? Are you attached to being admired? Are you attached to being morally superior? Every strong reaction hides a strong attachment, and every attachment is a potential weakness. Detachment does not mean you stop caring, it means you care selectively. You stop feeding every comment, every insult, every misunderstanding with your nervous system. You allow some things to pass through you without resistance. This creates an aura of unpredictability. Not because you are unstable, but because you are not easily moved. People sense this. They sense when someone cannot be baited. They sense when someone's composure is not performance but principle. Emotional withdrawal shifts the dynamic quietly. Instead of being pulled into emotional currents, you remain still, and stillness in a chaotic environment feels powerful. There is also another layer most people rarely notice. When withdraw emotionally, others reveal more about themselves. When you do not rush to fill silence, others expose their discomfort. When you do not react to provocation, others escalate. And in escalating, they expose their insecurity. Detachment becomes a mirror. It shows people their own intensity without you contributing to it. It allows behavior to unfold without interference. And in that unfolding you gather information. Information is leverage. You see who seeks attention, who seeks validation, who thrives on reaction, who grows louder when ignored, who grows quieter when met with calm. None of this requires confrontation, it requires observation. The emotional tension that once felt urgent begins to feel optional. You start recognizing that most emotional exchanges are not about truth, they are about ego, about status, about feeling superior or defended. And once you see this clearly, you no longer feel compelled to participate in every psychological duel. Your nervous system becomes your responsibility. Instead of reacting outwardly, you regulate inwardly. Instead of proving, you observe. Instead of defending, you evaluate. Emotional withdrawal is not suppression, it is filtration. It is deciding what deserves access to your energy. And when access becomes rare, your presence becomes heavier. Not louder, heavier. You do not argue for your value. You do not chase respect. You do not over-explain your intentions. You become selective in speech, measured in expression, deliberate in engagement. That deliberation is what makes you psychologically dangerous, not in aggression, but in control. Because once your emotions are no longer easily provoked, you cannot be steered through them. And when you cannot be steered, you cannot be controlled. That is the beginning of real power. The silent advantage of non-neediness: the less you need validation, the more influence you hold. This sounds simple, but it challenges one of the deepest human impulses, the desire to be approved of, to be accepted, to be seen as competent, valuable, respected. Most social dynamics quietly revolve around this need. People adjust their tone to be liked. They soften opinions to avoid rejection. They exaggerate achievements to gain admiration. They defend themselves quickly to protect status. Underneath all of it is need, and need is always perceptible. You may not consciously announce it, but others feel it. They feel when you are waiting for a nod, when you are scanning their face for agreement, when you are slightly unsettled by silence. The human nervous system is trained to detect dependency, and paradoxically, the more you try to secure respect, the less of it you command. What most people never examine is this patterns. People instinctively respect what does not chase them. Non-neediness changes the emotional geometry of a room. When you do not require attention, you stop competing for it. When you do not seek validation, you stop bargaining for approval. You become still in a space where others are subtly negotiating their position. And stillness stands out. Most social exchanges are not about content. They are about positioning. Who needs agreement? Who needs reassurance? Who needs to win? When you remove your need from the interaction, you step out of the invisible hierarchy. You are no longer asking for rank. You are no longer trying to secure relevance. That psychological independence feels heavier than volume. There is a hidden rule in power psychology: dependency lowers perceived status. This does not mean you should withdraw from connection or suppress emotion. It means you become aware of where your self-worth is anchored. If it is anchored in external feedback, your behavior will unconsciously bend toward preserving that feedback. You will hesitate when clarity would serve you. You will over-explain when silence would be stronger. You will compromise your internal standard to maintain external harmony. Non-neediness disrupts this pattern. When you do not need to be understood, you communicate more precisely. When you do not need to be admired, you move more authentically. When you do not need to be liked, you become less predictable. That unpredictability is not chaos, it is sovereignty. The unseen social pattern is subtle. People test where you seek approval. They push slightly. They challenge lightly. They disagree casually. Not always maliciously. Often unconsciously. They are scanning for stability. When your mood shifts because of a small critique, it signals sensitivity. When your tone sharpens because of mild disagreement, it signals insecurity. When your confidence inflates because of praise, it signals dependency. But when your emotional baseline remains stable, praise or criticism, something shifts in the atmosphere. You become difficult to manipulate. Non-neediness creates psychological leverage not through force but through absence. You are not trying to win. You are not trying to dominate. You are not trying to impress. You are simply grounded, and grounded individuals are unsettling to those who rely on emotional fluctuation to maintain control. Human behavior responds to scarcity. When your approval is not easily given, it becomes valuable. When your attention is not easily accessed, it becomes meaningful. When your emotional reactions are not easily triggered, they become significant when they do occur. You are not withholding strategically. You are simply not dispersing yourself carelessly. There is a deeper layer here. When you remove your need for validation, you also remove the fear of losing it. Fear is what fuels overreaction. Fear of losing respect. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being perceived as weak. When fear drives your communication, it introduces subtle urgency. Urgency lowers clarity. It creates noise in your delivery. It makes you overcommit or overcorrect. Non-neediness quiets that urgency. You no longer rush to secure your image. You no longer chase reassurance. You no longer defend every interpretation. You become selective, measured, calm. You allow misunderstanding to exist temporarily without panicking. You allow silence to stretch without filling it nervously. That patience shifts perception. People begin to sense that you are internally anchored. That your sense of value does not depend on their reaction. That you are not competing for psychological space. And ironically, this is when respect increases, not because you demanded it but because you stopped needing it. There is no aggression in this. No manipulation. Only regulation. Non-neediness does not mean indifference. It means your emotional state is self-regulated. It means you can engage fully without clinging. You can disagree without destabilizing. You can walk away without resentment. When you stop seeking validation, you start embodying authority. Authority is not loud. It does not plead. It does not chase affirmation. It is steady. It speaks when necessary and remains silent when unnecessary. It is comfortable with being misunderstood temporarily because it trusts long-term alignment over short-term approval. This shift is internal before it is external. You begin asking yourself different questions. Instead of, do they approve? You ask, am I aligned? Instead of, did I impress? You ask, was I precise? Instead of, do they respect me? You ask, did I respect myself? These questions redirect power, and when power moves inward, your presence changes. It becomes heavier, more contained, less reactive. You are no longer scanning for confirmation. You are operating from conviction. That is the silent advantage, not louder, not more visible, just less dependent. And in that absence of need, influence grows quietly. Discipline over reaction. Your first impulse is rarely your strongest position. The human nervous system is designed for speed, not strategy. A word offends you and your body tightens. A tone feels dismissive and your chest contracts. A challenge appears and your mind rushes to defend. These reactions are automatic. They are ancient. They are efficient. But they are not always intelligent. The internal conflict begins here. You feel something immediately, yet you know acting on it may weaken your position. The urge to respond feels powerful, almost urgent. Silence feels unnatural. Waiting feels uncomfortable. Not reacting feels like surrender. This discomfort is the training ground. Most conflicts do not escalate because of truth. They escalate because of ego. Someone feels disrespected. Someone feels misunderstood. Someone feels ignored. And instead of pausing, both sides rush to restore their emotional equilibrium by reacting outwardly. Reaction provides short-term relief. It releases tension. It asserts presence. It reclaims space. But it also exposes vulnerability. It shows where pressure lands effectively. It shows where your identity feels threatened. It reveals which words move you. Discipline interrupts this cycle. Discipline is not suppression. It is delayed expression. It is the conscious choice to observe the emotional surge for translating it into behavior. When you feel the urge to respond and you do not, something powerful happens. You regain control of the tempo. Tempo is leverage. In any interaction, the one who controls the pace often controls the direction. Reaction speeds everything up. It accelerates misunderstanding. It amplifies tone. It narrows perspective. But restraint slows the exchange. It introduces space between stimulus and response. That space is where authority lives. Emotional control is not about appearing calm. It is about remaining strategic. When you pause, you gather data. You observe the other person's posture, tone, intention. You ask internally, is this worth my energy? Is this a real threat or just wounded pride? What outcome am I actually pursuing? Without discipline, these questions never surface. Instead, the mind defaults to defense. It seeks to correct, justify, or overpower. But when discipline becomes habitual, your nervous system no longer dictates your behavior. It informs you, but it does not command you. There is a mental boundary that separates reaction from authority. Reaction says, I must respond now. Authority says, I will decide if this deserves a response. This boundary is subtle but transformative. It reframes emotional triggers as information rather than instruction. You begin to see irritation as a signal, not a mandate. Anger as energy, not direction. Discomfort as awareness, not weakness. Most people believe power comes from strong expression. In reality, power often comes from measured expression. When you react impulsively, you reveal your thresholds. When you restrain yourself, you conceal them. And concealed thresholds create unpredictability, not chaos. Unpredictability. Unpredictability introduces caution. Others begin to realize they cannot easily provoke you. They cannot map your triggers. They cannot escalate you on command. The emotional battlefield shifts from external confrontation to internal steadiness. Discipline also clarifies intention. When you pause, you ask yourself what outcome you want long term. Is it validation? Is it dominance? Is it resolution? Or is it peace? Without this clarity, reaction often sacrifices long-term authority for short-term satisfaction. Detachment from immediate emotion allows you to prioritize future positioning. You start seeing that many emotional exchanges are temporary. A heated comment fades. A misunderstanding dissolves. A slight loses relevance. But the way you responded remains. Your reputation for composure accumulates quietly over time. This accumulation builds psychological weight. People begin to associate you with steadiness, with thoughtfulness, with restraint. And restraint commands a different kind of respect than intensity ever could. There is also an internal shift that occurs. You no longer fear your emotions. You do not suppress them, but you do not obey them either. You feel anger without becoming it. You feel insult without collapsing into defense. You feel tension without rushing to dissolve it. This is emotional sovereignty. Sovereignty is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply refuses to be dictated by impulse. When discipline becomes instinctive, your reactions become intentional rather than reflexive. This changes how you carry yourself. Your movements slow slightly. Your words become fewer but sharper. Your silence becomes deliberate rather than awkward. You are no longer participating in every emotional exchange. You are choosing your entries. And in choosing, you elevate, because the person who reacts to everything is available to everyone. But the person who responds selectively becomes difficult to access emotionally. That difficulty is not coldness. It is boundary. Discipline over reaction transforms your internal landscape. Instead of being pulled outward by every stimulus, you remain anchored. Instead of amplifying noise, you reduce it. Instead of escalating tension, you neutralize it. Over time, this steadiness becomes your identity. Not reactive, deliberate, not explosive, measure. And once this identity solidifies, something subtle but powerful happens. You no longer feel the urgency to prove your strength through reaction. You demonstrate it through restraint. The calm form of power. Imagine walking into a room and needing nothing from it. No approval, no agreement, no validation, no dominance. Most people enter spaces with invisible demands. They want to be respected, they want to be heard, they want to be acknowledged. Even when they appear confident, there is often a quiet negotiation happening beneath the surface. How am I being perceived? Am I being valued? Am I winning this interaction? These silent negotiations drain authority. When you detach, something changes in your posture, internally first, externally second. You no longer enter rooms to extract anything. You enter grounded, observing, self-contained. This subtle shift alters how others experience you. Because when you need nothing, you cannot be pressured. What happens when you detach is rarely dramatic. It is quiet, gradual, almost invisible, but the psychological consequences are significant. When you detach from needing to be liked, people feel the absence of performance. When you detach from needing to win, people feel the absence of tension. When you detach from needing to respond, people feel the presence of stillness. Stillness is unsettling in environments driven by reaction. In social settings, most dynamics revolve around emotional exchange. One person pushes, another responds, one person tests, another reacts. But when someone refuses to participate in this cycle, not through avoidance, but through composure, the dynamic collapses. Detachment removes the emotional friction others unconsciously expect, and without friction, escalation loses its fuel. There is an inner authority principle at work here. The less you are emotionally accessible to provocation, the more stable your presence becomes. Authority does not argue for recognition. It does not chase acknowledgement. It does not rush to correct perception. It allows perception to evolve over time. Detachment supports this long-term orientation. When you stop trying to win every interaction, you start winning reputation. When you stop defending every misunderstanding, you start cultivating mystery. When you stop reacting to every stimulus, you start controlling the tempo of your life. Over time, this consistency builds something stronger than intimidation. It builds trust in your stability. People begin to realize that your reactions are rare, and because they are rare, they carry weight. Your silence is not emptiness. It is evaluation. Your calm is not passivity. It is containment. Your detachment is not indifference. It is control. The long-term power insight is simple but profound. Emotional steadiness compounds. Most people fluctuate. They are warm when praised and sharp when criticized, confident when supported and defensive when challenged. Their emotional tone shifts based on external conditions. But when your internal state remains largely consistent, regardless of circumstance, you signal independence from external influence. That independence is perceived as strength. Not loud strength, not theatrical dominance, but quiet, durable strength. Over time, you notice something else. You no longer feel the urge to correct every narrative. You no longer feel threatened by silence. You no longer rush to assert your position. You become comfortable with delayed validation, comfortable with misunderstood moments, comfortable with letting others miscalculate you temporarily. This comfort changes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who must manage perception. You start seeing yourself as someone who manages energy. You choose where your attention flows. You choose which conflicts deserve oxygen. You choose when to speak and when to observe. Your power becomes internalized rather than displayed. And once power is internalized, it no longer depends on visibility. You are not louder than others. You are not more reactive than others. You are not more forceful than others. You are simply less moved. This is where calm danger emerges. Not through intimidation, not through manipulation, not through aggression, but through emotional independence. When you detach, you stop broadcasting insecurity. You stop signaling urgency. You stop reacting to minor disruptions. You become harder to read, not because you are deceptive but because you are regulated. Regulated people cannot be easily destabilized, and people instinctively recognize this. Over time, your reputation shifts, not because you announced your strength, but because you consistently embodied it. You do not demand respect. You do not chase influence. You do not seek to overpower. You remain composed, and in a world driven by reaction, composure becomes rare. When something is rare, it becomes powerful. Eventually, you stop trying to appear dangerous, you simply become someone who cannot be emotionally manipulated. And the most dangerous person in the room is not the loudest. It is the one who remains steady when everyone else is reacting.